The Woman on the Porch. In the small Midwestern town of Maple Grove, Ohio, there was a house everyone knew, even if they had never stepped inside it. It sat at the edge of Main Street, modest and quiet, with white paint that had long since faded under years of sun, rain, and winter snow. The porch sagged slightly in the middle, its wooden boards creaking with every shift of weight. An old oak tree stood nearby, its branches stretching wide like open arms, offering shade in summer and bare honesty in winter. And every morning, without fail, Evelyn Carter sat there. She sat in a wooden rocking chair, wrapped in a soft cardigan no matter the season, her silver hair pinned neatly back. Her skin carried the fine lines of a life fully lived, lines carved by laughter, sorrow, patience, and time. But what most people noticed first were her eyes. They were clear, attentive, kind. The kind of eyes that made people feel less alone just by meeting them. No one knew exactly how old Evelyn was. Some guessed late 70s. Others said 80s. She never corrected them. Age had become unimportant to her long ago. Evelyn had lived in that house for over 40 years. She had raised no children there. She had thrown no loud parties. She had never owned much. But she had shared something far more rare. Consistency. Maple Grove was not a town people moved to. It was a town people were born into, worked in, and sometimes struggled to leave. Years ago, it had been busy and hopeful. A local manufacturing plant once provided stable jobs, benefits, and pride. Families bought homes. Kids played baseball in empty lots. The diner stayed open late. But times changed. The plant shut down. Jobs disappeared. Hope thinned quietly. People adapted the best they could. Some commuted long hours. Some worked 2 jobs. Some stayed because leaving felt riskier than staying. And slowly, worry settled into the town like dust, unseen, but everywhere. Evelyn saw it all from her porch. She watched parents leave early and return late. She saw teenagers lose their spark. She noticed how laughter became shorter, how conversations turned heavier. Yet every morning, she rocked gently in her chair and greeted the day as if it still held promise. That had not always been easy. 15 years earlier, Evelyn had buried her husband, Thomas Carter. Thomas had been steady, practical, and quietly affectionate. He was the kind of man who fixed things instead of talking about them. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, Evelyn felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. For months, she moved through the house like a shadow. She set 2 cups on the counter before realizing only one was needed. She listened for footsteps that never came. Grief pressed in on her from every direction. But one morning, sitting alone at the kitchen table, Evelyn had whispered something out loud. Something that would change the rest of her life. I am still here. She didn't say it with confidence. She said it with curiosity. And slowly, she began to understand something profound. Pain was unavoidable. But despair was a choice she didn't have to make. From that realization, something shifted in Evelyn. She allowed grief its place, but she refused to let it consume her days. She began sitting on the porch again. She began greeting neighbors. She began choosing calm over bitterness, hope over resentment. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just consistently. Years later, that quiet choice would ripple outward in ways no one expected. One chilly autumn afternoon, Laura Mitchell walked down Main Street with her head lowered and her arms folded tightly across her chest. Laura was 32 years old and already exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. She worked part-time at the local diner, juggling unpredictable shifts and unreliable pay. Her ex-husband had left years earlier, promising support that came rarely and always late. She had 2 children at home who asked questions she struggled to answer. That morning, her manager had pulled her aside. "Hours are getting cut again," he'd said apologetically. "I'm sorry." Laura nodded and pretended she understood, but fear settled deep in her stomach. Rent was due. Groceries were running low. Winter was coming. As she passed Evelyn's house, she barely noticed the porch at first. Then a voice called out gently. "Good afternoon, Laura." Laura stopped. She looked up and forced a polite smile. "Oh, hi, Miss Carter." Evelyn studied her for a moment, not intrusively, but attentively. "You look tired," Evelyn said softly. "The kind of tired that doesn't show on the outside." Laura tried to shrug it off, but something in Evelyn's tone unraveled her. Tears welled up before she could stop them. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Laura admitted. "I try so hard. I do everything I'm supposed to do. But nothing seems to change." Evelyn gestured to the porch steps. "Sit with me for a minute." Laura hesitated, then sat down, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. They sat quietly, listening to the wind move through the oak tree. Then Evelyn asked, "Tell me something honestly. What do you think is going to happen next in your life?" Laura stared at the ground. "I think things will fall apart," she said. "I think I'll mess up. I think my kids deserve better than me." Evelyn didn't interrupt. She didn't correct her immediately. Instead, she asked, "And how does thinking that make you feel?" Laura swallowed. "Like I'm already failing." Evelyn nodded. "That's because your thoughts are speaking to your heart," she said. "And your heart is listening." Laura frowned slightly. "But isn't that just reality?" Evelyn leaned back in her rocking chair. "Reality gives us facts," she said. "Our thoughts decide what we do with them." She paused, then continued. "When my husband died, I believed my life was over. Every morning, I told myself I had nothing left. And you know what? I felt exactly that way." Laura listened closely. "But one day," Evelyn said, "I asked myself a different question. I asked, what if surviving is enough for today?" She looked at Laura. "That question didn't erase my pain. But it gave me strength to stand up inside it." Laura felt her chest tighten. "So you're saying, my thinking is making things heavier?" "I'm saying your thinking is either helping you carry the load," Evelyn replied, "or making it crush you." Laura was quiet for a long time. "I can't just pretend everything's okay," she finally said. Evelyn smiled gently. "I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to choose hope alongside struggle." She leaned forward slightly. "If you wake up every day telling yourself you're failing, your spirit will believe it. But if you wake up and say, 'I am doing my best today,' you give yourself room to breathe." Laura stood to leave, something inside her subtly changed. That night, lying awake, she whispered words she had never tried before. "Today, I will do what I can." They didn't solve her problems. But they steadied her. And across town, Evelyn Carter rocked gently on her porch, knowing exactly how powerful that small shift could be. Because she had seen it before. Hope didn't arrive with miracles. It arrived with decisions. And in Maple Grove, those decisions were just beginning. Your thoughts shape your strength. Pain is real, but despair is optional. Hope begins with a quiet decision. In the weeks that followed Laura Mitchell's visit to Evelyn Carter's porch, something subtle began to change in Maple Grove. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. The factory did not reopen. The diner did not suddenly fill with customers. Bills did not magically disappear. Yet people began carrying themselves differently. Laura was the first to notice it in herself. Each morning, before her feet touched the cold bedroom floor, she paused. She took a breath and repeated the words Evelyn had given her, not like a wish, but like a promise. "I will do what I can today." Some mornings, the words felt strong. Other mornings, they felt thin and fragile. But she said them anyway. At the diner, when orders piled up and customers complained, Laura didn't spiral the way she used to. When her youngest asked why they couldn't buy certain things, Laura didn't crumble into guilt. She explained gently, honestly, without letting shame take the lead. And something else happened. People noticed. Something's different about you, her coworker Janice said one afternoon as they wiped down counters. You seem calmer. Laura shrugged. I'm still tired. I'm just not drowning in it anymore. Janice raised an eyebrow. How? Laura hesitated, then smiled slightly. There's this old woman, Evelyn Carter. She sits on Main Street. Janice laughed softly. Everyone knows Evelyn. Well, Laura said, she told me something that stuck. And Laura repeated the words. Not as advice. Not as preaching. Just as truth. Janice didn't respond right away. But that night, lying awake with her own worries, she remembered them. Across town, a man named Frank Delaney sat alone in his truck outside the closed factory gates. Frank had worked there for 26 years. He had planned to retire from that building. Instead, he had been laid off with a handshake and a letter that thanked him for his service. Since then, his days blurred together. Applications went unanswered. Savings dwindled. Pride kept him quiet. That afternoon, Frank had driven aimlessly, unable to sit still in his house. As he passed Main Street, he saw Evelyn rocking on her porch. Something inside him told him to stop. He didn't know why. He parked, walked up slowly, and stood awkwardly at the edge of the porch. Afternoon, Evelyn said, as if she had been expecting him. Frank cleared his throat. Ma'am. She gestured to the chair beside her. Sit. He hesitated, then obeyed. They sat in silence longer than Frank expected. He felt foolish, until Evelyn spoke. You look like a man who's been carrying something alone, she said. Frank exhaled sharply. I don't know who I am anymore, he admitted. I worked my whole life. Now I feel useless. Evelyn nodded. Work gives us structure, she said. But it doesn't give us worth. Frank frowned. Doesn't feel that way. No, Evelyn agreed. But feelings aren't always facts. She turned to him. Tell me, when you wake up, what's the first thing you think? Frank didn't hesitate. That I failed. Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. Then that's the weight you carry all day. She leaned closer. You didn't fail because life changed. You failed only if you stop believing you still matter. Frank stared at the ground. I don't know how to believe that, he said quietly. Evelyn smiled softly. Then start smaller. Tomorrow morning, don't ask yourself who you used to be. Ask yourself who you can be today. Frank left without saying much, but something followed him home. The next morning, instead of staying in bed, he got up. He fixed the loose fence panel in his yard. He helped his neighbor carry groceries. He filled out one more application. Not because he felt hopeful, but because he felt capable. And capability grew. Slowly, the porch on Main Street became something else. Not a gathering place. Not a destination. But a quiet anchor. People didn't always sit. Sometimes they just waved. Sometimes they paused for a sentence or two. But Evelyn noticed the same pattern over and over. People arrived heavy. They left lighter. Word spread, not like gossip, but like reassurance. She listens. She doesn't judge. She doesn't promise miracles. She just helps you breathe. One evening, the town faced its first real test. A storm rolled in unexpectedly, heavy rain, strong winds. Power lines went down. Streets flooded. The town lost electricity overnight. Panic crept in quickly. Refrigerators stopped humming. Phones lost charge. Fear found space to grow. Laura sat in her dark living room, her children sleeping beside her, anxiety tightening her chest. Old thoughts tried to return. What if this gets worse? What if I can't handle it? She closed her eyes and took a breath. I will do what I can today. The next morning, despite the chaos, people stepped outside. Neighbors checked on neighbors. Flashlights were shared. Meals were cooked together. And there, on her porch, Evelyn sat, wrapped in a blanket, lantern beside her. When people asked how she stayed so calm, she answered simply. "Worry doesn't fix the storm," she said. "But steadiness helps us stand through it." By the time power returned, something had shifted permanently. Maple Grove wasn't richer. It wasn't safer. But it was stronger. And Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. Because when people learn how powerful their thoughts are, they stop waiting for life to change, and start changing how they live inside it. Words carry farther than we realize. Calm spreads faster than fear. Strength grows when people believe they still matter. Winter arrived early in Maple Grove. It came without drama at first, just colder mornings, frost clinging to windows, breath turning visible in the air. But beneath the quiet beauty of the season, tension grew. Heating bills rose. Roads iced over. Work became harder to find. And for the first time since Evelyn Carter's quiet influence had begun spreading through the town, people started to wonder if hope alone would be enough. The real blow came in the form of a notice. One gray Monday morning, a letter arrived in mailboxes across Maple Grove. It bore the seal of the county council and contained news that hit like a punch to the chest. The town's community assistance program, the one that helped families with heating costs, medical bills, and emergency food support, was being suspended indefinitely due to budget cuts. No warning. No replacement. For many families, that program was the thin line keeping them afloat. Panic didn't explode immediately. It crept in slowly, like cold through a cracked window. At the diner, customers spoke in hushed tones. At the grocery store, people hesitated longer before placing items in their carts. Parents lay awake at night calculating numbers that never added up. Laura Mitchell read the letter twice, then sat at her kitchen table staring at nothing. Her first thought came fast and familiar. This is it. This is where everything falls apart. Her chest tightened. Then she remembered Evelyn's voice, not as a command, but as a steady presence. "What you think is what you carry." Laura closed her eyes and took a breath. "I will do what I can today," she whispered. That didn't make the letter disappear. But it stopped fear from taking over. Across town, Frank Delaney read the same notice in his truck. His jaw tightened. Old feelings threatened to resurface, the helplessness, the anger, the belief that no matter what he did, it would never be enough. For a moment, he considered tearing the letter in half. Instead, he folded it carefully and placed it on the dashboard. "Who can I help today?" he asked himself. That question felt strange. But it felt stronger than despair. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter sat on her porch, holding her own copy of the notice. She had lived long enough to recognize moments like this. Moments when everything people believed in was tested. Moments when fear tried to reclaim ground it had lost. She knew something the town did not yet realize. This wasn't a test of resources. It was a test of mindset. That afternoon, people began arriving at Evelyn's porch in greater numbers than ever before. Not for comfort. Not for reassurance. For answers. "Isn't this proof that positive thinking doesn't work?" one man asked, frustration sharp in his voice. "What are we supposed to do now?" another woman demanded. "Smile through this?" Evelyn listened without interruption. When the questions stopped, she spoke calmly. "Hope isn't pretending nothing hurts," she said. "Hope is choosing not to surrender to fear when it does." She stood slowly, leaning on the porch railing. "This town has been waiting for help to arrive from somewhere else," she continued. "But help has always been sitting right here." She gestured toward the people gathered. "If we let this break us, it will. But if we decide to carry each other, we will survive it." The crowd was quiet. Evelyn's voice softened. "Fear asks, what if everything goes wrong? Hope asks, what can we do together?" That evening, something remarkable happened. Without planning. Without leadership. Without permission. People began helping one another. Frank organized a small group to check on elderly neighbors and fix broken heaters. Laura and Janice coordinated shared meals. Families pooled resources. Warm coats were passed along. Empty garages became storage spaces for donated supplies. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was enough. Then came the night Evelyn didn't appear on her porch. At first, no one noticed. The next morning, the rocking chair remained empty. By afternoon, whispers spread. By evening, concern turned to alarm. Laura knocked on Evelyn's door. No answer. Frank tried next. Still nothing. Someone called for help. Evelyn was found inside her home, lying on the living room floor. She was alive, but weak, dehydrated, and struggling to breathe. The doctor later said she'd pushed herself too hard in the cold. The news hit the town harder than any budget cut ever had. Fear surged, not just for Evelyn's health, but for what her absence might mean. At the hospital, Laura stood in the hallway, tears slipping down her face. "What if she doesn't make it?" she whispered. Frank said nothing. But his hands shook. For the first time since this quiet movement began, Maple Grove felt unsteady. And lying in her hospital bed, Evelyn Carter opened her eyes to a reality she had long understood. Even hope needs carriers. The question was no longer whether Evelyn could guide the town. The question was whether the town had truly learned what she'd been teaching all along. Moral Thread, Act 3. Hope is revealed under pressure. Fear isolates, purpose unites. True strength is tested when support is removed. The first morning without Evelyn Carter on her porch felt wrong. People noticed it the way you notice a missing sound, the absence louder than anything else. Main Street looked the same, but something vital was missing. The rocking chair sat still. No gentle nod. No quiet smile. Laura Mitchell walked past on her way to the diner and slowed her steps. For the first time since she had met Evelyn, doubt crept back in. What if everything we believed in was tied to her? What if we can't do this without her? At the hospital, Evelyn lay unconscious, her body exhausted after decades of endurance and one winter too many. Doctors spoke in careful language. Nothing was certain. Recovery would take time, if it came at all. Fear returned to Maple Grove, but this time it didn't arrive alone. It arrived with responsibility. Frank Delaney stood outside the hospital that afternoon, staring at his reflection in the glass doors. He had spent his life waiting for instructions, from supervisors, managers, systems that told him where he belonged. Now there were no instructions. Only people looking at him, waiting. "We can't just stop," Laura said quietly as they gathered in the parking lot. "She didn't teach us to depend on her. She taught us to stand." Frank nodded slowly. "She carried the light," he said. But it was never hers alone. That night, something changed. Instead of gathering on Evelyn's porch, the town gathered for Evelyn. They organized shifts to sit with her at the hospital so she would never be alone. Others continued checking on neighbors. The shared meals continued. The small acts of care multiplied. Not because Evelyn was watching, but because her absence had revealed something powerful. They had become what she taught. Laura struggled the most. Without Evelyn's steady presence, the old fears tried to return. One evening, after a long shift, Laura sat in her car and cried, quietly, deeply. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered. Then she remembered something Evelyn once said. "Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward while carrying it." Laura wiped her tears and went inside. Across town, Frank faced his own test. He received another rejection letter that morning. For a moment, bitterness flared. The thought whispered again. "You're still useless." Frank clenched his fists. "No," he said aloud. "I still matter." He folded the letter and placed it beside the others, not as proof of failure, but as reminders of persistence. The town moved forward on fragile legs, but forward nonetheless. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, the phone rang at Laura's house. Evelyn was awake. The news spread quickly, faster than fear ever had. People cried. People laughed. People prayed. When Evelyn finally returned home weeks later, weaker but smiling, she found something unexpected waiting for her. The porch was full. Not with people seeking answers, but with people ready to give them. Laura helped her sit. Frank fixed the porch railing. Children waved. Evelyn looked around, eyes filled with tears. "You did it without me," she said softly. Laura shook her head. "We did it because of you." Evelyn smiled. "No," she corrected gently. "You did it because you believed." She settled into her rocking chair, the oak tree rustling above her. And for the first time, Evelyn understood something new. Her greatest lesson had not been spoken. It had been lived. True lessons remain when the teacher is gone. Strength is revealed in responsibility. Hope becomes powerful when shared. Spring arrived quietly in Maple Grove. It didn't announce itself with sudden warmth or dramatic change. Instead, it revealed itself slowly, in longer days, softer mornings, and the first hints of green pushing through soil that had endured a long, unforgiving winter. Life had not become easy. But it had become intentional. Evelyn Carter returned to her porch each morning, her steps slower now, her body more fragile, yet her presence deeper than ever. The rocking chair moved again, gently, steadily. And as before, people passed by, but something about them had changed. They no longer came searching for answers. They came carrying stories. Laura Mitchell stood on the porch one morning, holding a folded envelope in her hands. Her fingers trembled, not from fear this time, but from disbelief. "I got offered full-time hours," she said softly. "With benefits." Evelyn smiled, her eyes warm. "You didn't wait for life to change," she said. "You changed how you lived inside it." Laura nodded. "I stopped telling myself I was failing." Frank Delaney arrived later that afternoon. He didn't bring news of a job, at least not the kind he once imagined. Instead, he brought tools. "I started helping people fix things," he said. "Fences, heaters, roofs. Folks started paying me when they could." Evelyn reached for his hand. "You found purpose before permission," she said. Around town, similar stories unfolded. Not miracles. Not fairy tales. But progress. Neighbors greeted each other again. The diner stayed busier. A small community fund formed, not from abundance, but from commitment. Evelyn watched it all with quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, she gathered Laura, Frank, and several others on the porch. "I won't always be here," she said calmly. The words hung heavy in the air. "But what matters isn't who sits in this chair," she continued. "What matters is what you choose to carry forward." She looked at each of them. "Life will always test you. There will always be loss, uncertainty, and fear. But you've learned something powerful." She tapped her chest gently. "Your thoughts shape your strength. Your hope shapes your actions. And your actions shape your world." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn closed her eyes and listened, to laughter, to footsteps, to life continuing. And Maple Grove continued too. Not because hardship disappeared, but because fear no longer led. Final moral. Positive thinking is not denial, it is preparation. Strength begins in the mind and spreads through action. Hope becomes legacy when it is shared. If this story moved you, remember this. You don't need to change the world all at once. You only need to change how you face today. And that is how everything begins. If you loved this story, please subscribe for more.